Thank you for watching this project help video for lesson 25. I will help you answer each question in the project by providing step-by-step instructions using example problems. A good strategy might be to pause the video after each example and then work the corresponding problem in the projects. All right, so let's get started. Champa is pleading not guilty to destroying Universe 3. If he is found guilty, the Omni King will destroy him. Zeno's attendants have gathered some evidence of the crime that can be represented as a system of inequalities. Y is less than or equal to 4x minus 1, and y is greater than 1/2 x plus 2. X represents the time that has passed since the crime, and y represents the distance in miles from the scene. As confirmed by the Omni King's attendants, Champa was 6 light years away from the explosion 4 hours after the incident. So the first question asks, which answer choice shows the graph of the inequalities? All right, so we can graph inequalities very similarly to the way we graph lines, right, with two exceptions. One, we have to decide what type of line style we should have, solid or dashed, and then two, where the shading should be, either above or below. And if you look carefully at the options here we have for graphs, you'll notice that the same two lines are represented at each, but the shading is different for each. So the shading and the line style, remember, are determined solely by the inequality symbol itself. Right? It has nothing to do with if the slope is positive or negative, right? Those two things are controlled exclusively by the inequality symbol. So for this first inequality here, y is less than or equal to 4x minus 1, we would go to the line where y is less than or equal to 4x. So I'd be looking for the one that crosses the y-axis at -1, right? Because that's our y-intercept right there. All right, so in all of them, it's this red line. Okay, so now I know that corresponds to this first equation, this first inequality, excuse me. Now I decide what type of line style it should be. All right, well, it should be solid, right? When we have an or equal to, we draw a solid line. And it doesn't matter if it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. If we have the or equal, it's a solid line. So we know where that red line is, it should be solid. All right, so if you take a look at these two graphs that we've drawn here, I'm going to zoom in on a few of them. Notice this first one, that has a dashed line for that equation that runs through the y-intercept at -1, so it can't be this one. And if I look at the second one here, okay, this one correctly has a solid line. All right, so maybe this is an option. And if you look at the third graph here, we also have a solid line for that red line, like we know that it should be. So maybe that's an option. But this last one here, right, that the inequality, that first inequality represented by this line here is dashed. All right, so I know that it should be solid, so it can't be that option. And so now we're looking at one of these two things. And now we ask ourselves, where should the shading be? Let's just work one inequality at a time. All right, so in this case, it says less than or equal to. So less than, right, means below. So it kind of matches up with how it sounds, right? Less is below. And when I say below, when we're shading, I want you to look at the y-intercept. I want you to look at where that line crosses the y-axis and then ask yourself, is the shading above that point or below that point? All right, and where should it be? In this case, it should be below. All right, so take a look at where the red one, we already know it can't be this one. Let's take our last two options. Remember here, option 2 and 4. And then in this case, here's the red line. The shading should be below because that's less than. That means down here, underneath that -1. But remember, the red line in this graph corresponds to that red shading, and it's actually shaded above that point. So now I know that this is the correct option here. Let's check the other one just so that you can see it work. So here's this inequality here. It has a y-intercept of 2, so I know that it's talking about this blue line here. So it says greater than. We have no or equal to, so it should be dashed. Okay, so yeah, look, this is dashed. And then greater than means shaded above. So look, here's the y-intercept at -2, and that shading is above. So in this case, it worked for both. This one is shaded below. This one's shaded above. This section here, this darker section, is where the shading overlaps. So when we have a system of inequalities, where the shading overlaps represents our solution set. All right, so now since Champa was 6 light years away 4 hours after the explosion, his distance can be represented by the ordered pair 4, 6. Based on the graph, what can we say about that point? Okay, well, let's go back to the graph. Here's the graph. And according to our information, we have the point 4, 6. All right, so I'm going to find that point on this graph. So I'm going to go over 4 on the x, up 6. All right, so here's that point 4, 6. Notice that that is in the overlap, right? This is where the shading overlaps. That point is right there. So when I go back to the previous question, right, what can we say about that point? So here's my options. It lies in the area where the graphs of the two inequalities in the system overlap. Yes, it does, right? They overlap there. This one says it lies in the shaded area of one, but not both. It actually was in both, right? It was where that they overlapped. And it lies in the area that's not shaded. That would have been the white area. It clearly is in the area where they overlap. So just on your problem, check to see if the point they give you is in the shaded part, and if it's in the shaded of both inequalities, where the shading overlaps or not. So the last question says, okay, now based on that information, right, does Champa's location prove that he is definitely guilty? You know, should the Omni King destroy Champa? And then explain. Okay, so when we have a system of inequalities, we don't get one exact solution like we do if they were equations. Right? We get a whole system, a whole set of solutions where they overlap. It is possible that they don't overlap, right, when we have parallel lines. And otherwise, we're going to get a place where they overlap, like in this case here. So let's take a look at our inequality, our 0.46. That is one possible solution, but it's not all of them, right? We have a whole set of solutions. So just because Champo happened to be in that overlapped area means to me that he could be guilty, right? He could be, but we don't know for a fact if he is. It's not enough information to pin it down because there are a lot of solutions to that set of inequalities.